It's not practical for me to cover all of Photoshop's functionality in this course, and if I did, it would likely just overwhelm you. Also, I'm assuming you're starting your workflow in Lightroom, and as I said before, you can use Lightroom to do most of what you need to do. All of that contrast and color correction stuff you saw in Lightroom, you can do all of that in Photoshop, and you can do it all in several different ways. Photoshop provides many different color correction tools because some of those tools are better for certain types of problems than others, but you'll probably do most of those corrections in Lightroom. If you're coming into Photoshop, it's to do some things that Lightroom can't do. Lightroom has the ability to apply edits to just part of an image, but I feel like Photoshop's facilities in that regard are much stronger. Most of the time, if I'm coming into Photoshop, it's because I need to make local adjustments, or I need to alter the image at a pixel level. Here's what I mean by local adjustments. This is an image that I started in Lightroom, and then I'm going to finish in Photoshop. I've actually done the work already. I'm going to just turn my edits on one at a time so you can see the types of things that I was doing here. So in Photoshop, I have a number of different tool palettes, a number of different control palettes, all these windows, a toolbar across the top. The thing's just bristling with image editing power here. And I do a lot of my work down here in the Layers palette. In Photoshop, you can apply an edit or an effect, some edits or effects, as a layer. That layer can be altered later, it can be turned off, it can be discarded. This is a way of doing non-destructive editing in Photoshop. So what I have here are a stack of layers that affect my image in different ways, and each one has a little mask. Masks are like stencils, they're how I constrain edits to particular parts of the image. I'm not going to show you how I built the edit, I just want to show you what the edits do so that you can get a sense of the types of things that I'm choosing to do here in Photoshop. So I have this landscape image. This was in New Mexico. A storm was either just coming or just going, I can't remember which, or maybe somewhere in between. And I liked this shot of the road going into the distance, and of course the dramatic sky with the big Jacob's ladders coming down. So I started by brightening the foreground. I didn't brighten it uniformly. You can see that I kept my brightening to just this place in here because I'm trying to channel the viewer's eye into the center of the image. So that was nice, but then I decided the sky, it's cool, these striations of light, but I wanted them a little stronger, so I increased the contrast of them, and that looks a little bit better. But in the process of doing that, it deepened the color saturation, so now those bits look too blue compared to the rest of the sky, so I added another layer to pull some of that contrast back out. Or I'm sorry, some of that color saturation back out. And then finally, I added an overall effect to the image to darken it, except for this one little bit. So here I'll give you a before and after. Here's the original image. Here's the edited image. So it's a very different feel, a very particular effect. Again, I'm trying to just highlight this part of the road, get the viewer's eye in there where I want it, but I want it to look natural. I don't want the edits to be obvious. That's the difference between a good edit and a bad edit. A good edit is one that you don't know about. I could have done all of these things in Lightroom. It would have been harder. The Lightroom brush tools are somehow more blunt or coarse to me than Photoshop's brush tools are. But more importantly, the reason I do these kinds of edits in Photoshop is because of this thing right here. This is called a histogram. We're not going to go into what it is. Yes, there is one in Lightroom, but it behaves differently than the Photoshop one. With it, I can be sure that my edits are precise. I can make sure that they're being set in the way they need to be set for me to get good prints out of this file. So that's really the main reason that I do these kinds of things in Photoshop, is I need this particular type of histogram that it displays. Let's do another one. Here's another image. This is in the Badlands in South Dakota, and the sun was setting. The sun was setting and there were big fires burning 2 or 3 states away, so I was getting this dramatic sky. But what caught my eye was this strip of grass here. Now it doesn't look like much here, but what I was imagining is that I could edit the image in such a way that I could really play up the contrast between this strip of grass and all of the stuff that's around it. And I had a sense that the grass was probably backlit to some degree, maybe not so apparent in this image, but that I could exaggerate that. So this is a case of me having edits in mind while I was shooting. I was looking at this scene and through the viewfinder even able to say, well, compositionally it might be kind of interesting, but it's a pretty flat, boring image. So I was already thinking about edits. I took this shot because I knew the edits that I would be able to make later, and here they are. I started by just brightening up the foreground, and boom, right away, things are looking better. A few things have happened here with this one edit. this one edit, which has been constrained to just the foreground, I've improved the contrast. That improvement in contrast has brought out more detail because there's a relationship between contrast in an image and the amount of detail. When there is more contrast, I can see more differences between blacks and whites and different colors. That means I can see edges easier. That means I can see texture and detail better. So that right away knocks this into a more interesting place. Also, as I increase contrast, I increase color saturation. That's just the way it is. It's not that those were two separate steps. Increase in color saturation is just an inherent byproduct of increased contrast. So that's helped a lot. But I'm still not getting that thing that I wanted from the grass. I really wanted it to look like it was being lit up by the setting sun, so I added another layer. Aha, now we're getting somewhere. To be honest, it's been several months since I took this picture. I'm not sure that the grass didn't actually look that bright to my eye and that the camera didn't just capture it that way. Or maybe I'm making the whole thing up. I don't know. There's something that feels authentic about that edit, and I might be wrong. So looking at it now, I liked it, but I wanted this area in here to have a little more power to it. It's roughly the same tonal values as all of this stuff at the bottom and even this stuff up here. That means the whole image is going to be kind of uniform when it prints. So I added another layer to just brighten up this bit. That does something else. It gives me a greater sense of three-dimensional depth in the scene, because this being a different tone than this implies that there's a piece of geometry there, some kind of geometric change there. And then finally I dropped one more layer to just brighten the whole thing up so that it would print properly. Again, I could have done all of these in Lightroom. It would have been harder because I have a more refined degree of brush control here, but more importantly, I have this the histogram readout up here, which lets me be very precise about where I'm setting different brightness levels and different amounts of contrast. So that is one of the things that I use Photoshop for. Like I said before, fine art images like this, for me, they all take a final step through Photoshop where I do lots of fine adjusting, and I do it very precisely and very meticulously. Another thing that I might use Photoshop for is what we've already talked about, the thing that people think of when they think of Photoshopping, and that's retouching.